In a small-town diner, an arrogant CEO throws down a shocking offer. $10,000. One night. No romance, just a test to prove everyone has a price. But this single mom does the unthinkable. And his jaw hits the floor. She's not for sale. She stands on faith. And then a little boy tugs his sleeve. "Mommy says you're my daddy." Now the test flips. Secrets surface. A hidden past connects them in ways he never saw coming. A glittering gala, a broken promise, a choice that could heal a family or shatter it. He has money. She has courage. The boy just wants a home. When pride slams into faith, can a man buy forgiveness, or will love demand a price he can't pay? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Charlotte Hayes wiped down another sticky table. Her fingers ached from hours of carrying heavy plates, and her feet felt like they were made of concrete. The night shift at May's Diner dragged on, the clock on the wall seeming to move slower with each passing minute. She glanced at her phone for the 100th time that evening. No new messages from Mrs. Peterson, who was watching Daniel. Her son's fever had been climbing all day, and worry gnawed at her stomach like a hungry mouse. The bell above the door chimed. A man in an expensive suit walked in, looking completely out of place among the worn leather booths and faded checkerboard floor. He carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the humble diner. Charlotte grabbed a menu and approached his table, fighting back a yawn. "Welcome to May's. Can I start you off with some coffee?" The man barely looked up from his phone. "Black coffee. And whatever passes for a decent meal in this establishment." His tone made Charlotte's spine stiffen, but she kept her voice pleasant. "Our meatloaf is the house specialty. Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans." "Fine." He waved her away, still focused on his phone. As Charlotte headed to the coffee pot, her own phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Her heart jumped when she saw Mrs. Peterson's name. "Daniel's fever is up to 102.3, the text read. "He's asking for you." Charlotte's hands shook as she poured the coffee. She'd already used up all her sick days when Daniel had strep throat last month, but her baby needed her. She found her manager, Rita, by the kitchen door. "Rita, I'm so sorry, but I need to leave early. Daniel's fever is getting worse and—" "Absolutely not." Rita's face hardened. "We're short-staffed as it is. You can't keep running home every time that kid sneezes." "He's really sick," Charlotte protested, keeping her voice low. "Mrs. Peterson says his fever is climbing. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." "Important?" Rita's voice rose. "You know what's important? Keeping this diner running, keeping our customers happy, keeping your job." Charlotte felt tears pressing behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I understand that, but he's only 7. He needs me." "What you need is to get your priorities straight." Rita jabbed a finger at Charlotte's chest. "I've been more than patient with your situation, but I'm getting tired of picking up your slack. Either finish your shift or don't bother coming back tomorrow." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She couldn't lose this job. The diner's tips helped pay for Daniel's medications, and the flexible hours let her work her second job at the grocery store. But the thought of her sick little boy crying for her made her chest ache. At the counter, the man in the suit watched their exchange with undisguised interest. His coffee sat untouched, steam curling into the air. "I'll stay," Charlotte said quietly, squaring her shoulders. "But I need to make a quick call." Rita's lips pressed into a thin line. "Make it fast." Charlotte stepped into the break room, her hands trembling as she dialed Mrs. Peterson. "How is he?" "Restless," the elderly woman replied. "I gave him some children's Tylenol, but he keeps asking when you're coming home." Charlotte closed her eyes, picturing Daniel's flushed face and tousled hair. "Tell him Mommy loves him so much. I'll be there as soon as I can, okay? Try putting a cool cloth on his forehead. That usually helps." After hanging up, she took a deep breath and straightened her name tag. 4 more hours. She could do this. She had to do this. Back in the dining room, she delivered the suit-wearing man's meatloaf. His sharp eyes followed her movements, making her uncomfortable. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice carrying an accent that spoke of private schools and boardrooms. "Yes, sir. Can I get you anything else?" He studied her for a long moment. "Your son is sick." It wasn't a question. Charlotte's spine stiffened again. Is there something wrong with your meal? No. He cut into the meatloaf with precise movements. It must be difficult, raising a child alone. Charlotte forced a polite smile. Will that be all, sir? The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and dirty dishes. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket, but she resisted checking it again. The man in the suit lingered over his meal, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Finally, near closing time, he approached the counter where she was rolling silverware into paper napkins. His suit jacket was draped over one arm, his tie slightly loosened. How much would it take? He asked. Charlotte blinked. Excuse me? To buy your time. He pulled out a leather wallet. $10,000. One night. The blood drained from Charlotte's face. I'm not that kind of... Not for that, he interrupted smoothly. Consider it a social experiment. I'm curious to see if everyone truly has a price. Charlotte's hands clenched into fists. The napkin she'd been holding crumpled. I don't care what kind of experiment you're running. I'm not for sale. $20,000 then. His lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Surely your son's welfare is worth that much. The mention of Daniel made something snap inside her. My son is exactly why I would never sell myself, for any amount. He deserves a mother he can be proud of. She turned away, her whole body trembling with anger and exhaustion. Your bill is at the register. Have a good night. Behind her, she heard him chuckle softly. Fascinating. Charlotte kept her back straight as she walked to her next table, where a truck driver was asking for his check. She could feel the suit-wearing man's gaze following her, calculating and intense, but she refused to look his way again. Her dignity was not for sale. No matter how much money he offered, no matter how desperate things got, some things were worth more than dollars and cents. Daniel deserved better than a mother who could be bought. Charlotte slipped through the back door of May's Diner, the cool night air, a blessed relief after hours in the stuffy kitchen. The employee break area was little more than a concrete slab with a rusty folding chair, but it was her sanctuary for 15 precious minutes. She sank onto the chair, phone clutched in her trembling hands as she dialed Mrs. Peterson's number. How is he? She asked the moment her neighbor answered. He's sleeping now, dear. The Tylenol finally kicked in. Mrs. Peterson's gentle voice helped ease some of Charlotte's worry. His fever's down to 101.8. Charlotte closed her eyes, saying a silent prayer of thanks. I'll try to get home as soon as The back door creaked open, and Charlotte turned to find the man in the expensive suit standing there, his tall frame blocking the dim light from inside. Her stomach tightened with instinctive wariness. This area is for employees only, sir, she said firmly, rising from her chair. Nathaniel Cross stepped fully into the break area, his polished shoes incongruous against the cracked concrete. I wanted a private word with you, Ms. Hayes. His voice was smooth, cultured, with an edge of authority that suggested he wasn't used to being refused. Charlotte straightened her spine. I need to get back to work. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with your manager earlier. He moved closer, and Charlotte caught a whiff of expensive cologne. About your son being ill. That's none of your business. Charlotte tried to step around him, but he shifted, blocking her path. I have a business proposition for you. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a leather checkbook. One that could solve your financial difficulties. Charlotte's cheeks burned. Had he heard everything? Her pleading with her manager about the missed rent payment? About Daniel's medical bills? I'm not interested in any propositions, she said coldly. Nathaniel's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. $10,000 for one evening of your time. Charlotte's breath caught. The amount was more money than she made in 6 months. Before you misunderstand, he continued, his tone almost bored. I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate. I simply want to prove a point about human nature. He began writing in his checkbook, speaking as casually as if discussing the weather. Everyone has a price, Miss Hayes, even the proudest among us. The initial shock of his offer gave way to a wave of anger so powerful it made Charlotte's hands shake. Is this amusing to you? She demanded. Playing games with people who are struggling to get by? He looked up, genuine surprise flickering across his features. This is hardly a game. It's a straightforward business transaction. One evening of your time, doing nothing more than having dinner and conversation with me. $10,000. He tore the check from his book and held it out. Think of your son's medical bills, the rent you're behind on. Charlotte stared at the check, her throat tight. The amount would indeed solve so many problems. It would give her breathing room, a chance to get ahead instead of constantly running to catch up. Daniel could have new shoes, proper winter clothes. But the cost would be her dignity. This wealthy stranger thought he could buy her self-respect with his casual cruelty masked as charity. No. The word came out quiet but firm. Nathaniel's eyebrows rose. No? I won't be part of your experiment in human nature. Charlotte lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. My pride isn't for sale. Neither is my dignity, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave now. He studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he placed the check on the rickety break table. The paper seemed to glow under the harsh security light. For your son, he said softly. No strings attached. Before Charlotte could respond, he turned and walked back into the diner. Through the window, she watched him drop a $100 bill on his table and stride out the front door, not looking back. The check lay on the break table like a challenge. Charlotte picked it up with trembling fingers, its crisp newness a stark contrast to her work-roughened hands. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what that money could do for Daniel. Then, with deliberate movements, she tore it into tiny pieces and let them flutter into the trash can. She had only a few minutes left of her break, but she needed every second to compose herself. Squaring her shoulders, she went back inside to finish her shift. There were tables to clean and customers to serve, and her son was waiting for her at home. Her dignity, at least, was still intact. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Charlotte wiped down the last table at May's Diner. Her muscles ached from the long shift, and worry about Daniel gnawed at her thoughts. The check still lay where she'd left it in her apron pocket, its presence burning like a hot coal against her hip. She pulled it out, smoothing the creased paper between her fingers. $10,000. The amount seemed almost unreal, like Monopoly money. But it was real enough, drawn on a prestigious bank, signed with an elegant flourish that spoke of wealth and power. Charlotte sank into one of the vinyl booths, her reflection fragmented in the dark window beside her. The diner was empty now, chairs upturned on tables, coffee makers cleaned and silent. In the quiet, she could hear the voice of practicality whispering all the things that money could do. It could pay for Daniel's asthma medications for a year, cover the 3 months of back rent they owed, replace the threadbare winter coat he'd outgrown, put food in their nearly empty pantry. Lord, she whispered, what should I do? Her late husband Tom's face floated in her memory. He'd always said that pride was different from dignity. Pride could get in the way of accepting help, but dignity was about staying true to your values. The check hadn't come from a place of kindness or genuine desire to help. It had been meant to prove a point about human weakness. Charlotte pulled out her phone and checked her banking app. The numbers stared back at her, harsh and unforgiving. Rent due, $850. Electric bill, $127.33. Daniel's prescription refill, $75 with insurance. The pediatrician copay from last week, $40. Her fingers trembled as she touched the check again. The paper felt expensive, thick and creamy under her fingertips. She thought of Daniel's flushed face when she'd left him with Mrs. Peterson. How he tried so hard to be brave when he wasn't feeling well. What kind of mother would she be to let pride stand in the way of providing for her child? But another voice, quiet yet insistent, reminded her that Daniel needed more than just material provisions. He needed to see that integrity mattered more than money, that his mother couldn't be bought, no matter how difficult things got. Charlotte stood up, tucking the check into her purse. She finished closing duties on autopilot, counting the register, mopping the floors, setting the alarm. The night air was crisp when she finally stepped outside, stars twinkling overhead in the small-town sky. The community hospital sat just 2 blocks away, its windows glowing softly in the darkness. Charlotte's feet carried her there before she'd fully made up her mind. The building's lobby was quiet at this late hour, just a drowsy security guard nodding at her as she entered. Near the entrance stood a clear donation box, its sides plastered with photos of children who'd been treated there. Some smiled from hospital beds. Others played in the pediatric ward's cheerful playroom. A sign above read, "Help us help children." Charlotte approached the box slowly, her purse heavy with decision. This was where Daniel had been born, where they'd spent countless hours in the ER for his asthma attacks. The staff had always been kind, working with her on payment plans, never making her feel less than for struggling to pay the bills. She opened her purse and took out the check, holding it one last time. $10,000 could change so much in her and Daniel's life. But at what cost to her soul? To the example she wanted to set for her son? The faces of the children in the photo seemed to watch her as she stood there. Some of their families probably faced the same struggles she did, choosing between medication and groceries, staying up late worrying about bills. This money could help them too. Charlotte's hand was steady as she slipped the check through the donation slot. The sound of it falling seemed louder than it should have in the quiet lobby. "Lord," she whispered, resting her palm against the cool plastic of the box. "I trust you to provide for us in your way, not through games or tests of character. Let this money help children who need it." A strange peace settled over her as she stepped back. The weight in her pocket was gone, but something lighter and stronger had taken its place. She thought of Daniel, probably sleeping now, his fever hopefully broken. She would have to find another way to make ends meet, but she would do it with her dignity intact. The security guard gave her another nod as she turned to leave. Outside, the stars seemed brighter somehow, as if approving her choice. Charlotte began the walk home, her steps quick despite her exhaustion. She had the late shift again tomorrow, and her son would need her early in the morning. The path ahead wasn't easy, but at least it was clear. The hospital's windows cast soft squares of light on the sidewalk as she walked away. Inside, the check lay in the donation box, its arrogant purpose transformed into something better, something healing. Charlotte smiled slightly, wondering what Nathaniel Cross would think when he discovered where his money had gone. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she could face Daniel in the morning knowing she'd chosen integrity over easy money. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet street as she headed home, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. The night air carried the scent of approaching autumn, and somewhere in the distance a church bell chimed the hour. Charlotte quickened her pace, knowing Mrs. Peterson would be waiting up for her, probably with a cup of tea and kind words ready. Nathaniel Cross stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite, staring at the small town's twinkling lights below. His Italian leather shoes sank into the plush carpet as he paced, phone pressed to his ear. "James, I need you to check something for me." His voice carried the sharp edge of authority that made junior executives quiver. "There's a check I wrote earlier tonight, $10,000. Track it." On the other end, his assistant's keyboard clicked rapidly. "Of course, Mr. Cross. May I ask the recipient?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. The waitress's defiant eyes still burned in his memory. Charlotte Hayes. "One moment, sir." While waiting, Nathaniel loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the hotel's premium selection. The amber liquid caught the dim light as he swirled it, much like that stubborn spark he'd seen in Charlotte's eyes when she'd refused his money. He took a slow sip, savoring the burn. In 15 years of business dealings, no one had ever turned down his money. He built his empire on the fundamental truth that everyone had a price. Yet this waitress, this nobody from nowhere, had looked at him like he was less than the gum stuck to her sensible shoes. "Sir?" James's voice crackled through the phone. "I've located the check." "And?" Nathaniel drummed his fingers against the crystal tumbler. "It was deposited about an hour ago." A smirk tugged at Nathaniel's lips. "Of course it was. Everyone breaks eventually. Send me the bank details." "Sir," James interrupted, something he never did. "You might want to sit down for this." Nathaniel's smirk faltered. "Excuse me, the check was deposited into the Children's Hope Hospital Foundation's donation account." The Scotch glass froze halfway to Nathaniel's mouth. "What did you just say?" "She donated it, sir. All $10,000. I'm looking at the transaction record right now. It went straight to the hospital's charitable fund for families who can't afford treatment." The glass slipped from Nathaniel's fingers, hitting the carpet with a muted thud. Scotch soaked into the expensive fibers, but he didn't notice. He stood perfectly still, his mind struggling to process this information. "That's impossible," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Run it again." "I already did, sir. 3 times. The money went to help sick children. There's even a note in the donation system. For those who need it more than me, CH." Nathaniel sank into the nearest chair, his legs suddenly weak. The woman had barely 2 pennies to rub together. He'd seen the worn edges of her uniform, the careful way she counted her tips, the shadows of exhaustion under her eyes. She needed that money desperately, if his instincts were right. And yet, "Sir, would you like me to look into anything else?" Nathaniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time since his ruthless climb to the top, since becoming the man who always had the last word in any room, he found himself completely speechless. "Sir, are you there?" The phone slipped slightly in his grip as he stared unseeing at the city lights. In his mind, he saw Charlotte again, not her defiance this time, but the quiet dignity with which she'd carried herself. The gentle way she'd handled that rude customer, the soft worry in her voice when she'd mentioned her sick child, the unwavering certainty in her eyes when she'd refused his money. He'd meant to teach her a lesson about pride. Instead, she'd taught him something about integrity that shook him to his core. "Mr. Cross?" James's concerned voice finally penetrated his thoughts. Nathaniel cleared his throat, trying to find his usual commanding tone. It eluded him. "That will be all, James." He ended the call and sat in the darkening room, his empire of steel and glass suddenly feeling hollow around him. The woman had taken his attempt to prove her mercenary nature and turned it into an act of pure generosity. She'd had every right to keep that money, every justification to cash it for her own needs. Instead, she'd given it away to help others. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Cross, the man who prided himself on understanding human nature, on knowing exactly how to leverage people's greed and ambition, found himself facing something he couldn't comprehend. In the quiet of his luxury suite, surrounded by all the trappings of his success, he sat in stunned silence, humbled by a waitress who had nothing but had given everything. The night deepened around him, but he remained motionless, the taste of scotch forgotten on his tongue, his certainty about the world subtly but irrevocably shaken. The morning sun filtered through worn curtains as Charlotte stirred a pot of oatmeal on her small stove. The sweet smell of cinnamon and brown sugar filled their modest kitchen. Daniel sat at the table, his pajamas rumpled and his hair sticking up in all directions. "Mommy, can we put extra raisins in today?" Daniel asked, his chin propped on his hands. His fever from yesterday had broken, leaving just a slight flush in his cheeks. "Of course, sweetheart." Charlotte smiled, reaching for the box of raisins. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet as she moved around the kitchen. Their home wasn't much, but it was filled with love and memories. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better." Daniel watched as she sprinkled a generous handful of raisins into his bowl. "Mrs. Peterson said I should stay home one more day just to be sure." Charlotte nodded, grateful for their elderly neighbor who helped watch Daniel when she worked. "That's probably wise." She set the steaming bowl in front of him and kissed the top of his head. The scent of baby shampoo lingered in his soft brown hair. "Mommy," Daniel stirred his oatmeal thoughtfully, "do you think Daddy can see us from heaven?" Charlotte's heart squeezed. She sat down beside him, her own bowl momentarily forgotten. "I believe he can, honey. The Bible says our loved ones are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, like angels." Daniel's eyes brightened. "Something like that." Charlotte reached for his small hand. "Your daddy loved you very much. He'd be so proud of the boy you're becoming." Daniel spooned up some oatmeal, careful not to spill. "I remember when he used to make funny faces to make me laugh." His voice grew quieter. "Sometimes I forget what he looked like." Charlotte got up and retrieved a worn photo album from the bookshelf. She opened it to a page showing a smiling man with Daniel's same warm brown eyes, holding a toddler-aged Daniel on his shoulders. "See? You have his eyes and his kind smile." Charlotte traced the photograph gently. "And his good heart. Do you miss him lots?" Daniel asked, studying the picture. "Every day," Charlotte admitted softly. "But God gives us strength when we need it. And he blessed me with you." Daniel leaned against her side. "Mrs. Peterson says God has a plan for everybody." "She's right." Charlotte stroked his hair. "We just have to trust him, even when we don't understand everything." "Like when you gave away that check?" Daniel asked innocently. Charlotte stilled. "You knew about that?" Daniel nodded. "I heard you praying last night. You said, 'Thank you, God, for helping me do the right thing.'" He looked up at her. "Was it a lot of money?" "It was," Charlotte said carefully. "But sometimes doing the right thing is more important than money." "Is that why you gave it to the hospital? To help sick kids?" "Yes, sweetheart." Charlotte hugged him close. "There are families who need it more than we do." They finished their breakfast together, sharing quiet conversation and comfortable silences. After clearing the dishes, Charlotte helped Daniel get dressed for his day with Mrs. Peterson. "Remember to take your medicine at lunch," Charlotte reminded him as she prepared to leave for her afternoon shift at the diner. "And be good for Mrs. Peterson." "I will," Daniel promised, hugging her tight. "Can we say our prayer?" Charlotte knelt beside him, their hands clasped together. "Dear Lord," she began, "thank you for this day and for healing Daniel's fever. Please watch over us and help us to be kind and generous to others. In Jesus' name, amen." "Amen," Daniel echoed. He gave her another quick squeeze. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything." The day passed in a blur of coffee refills and customer orders. As evening approached, Charlotte's feet ached in her worn sneakers. The dinner rush was just beginning when she noticed Daniel's face pressed against the diner's front window, Mrs. Peterson standing behind him. She hurried to the door. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, we're fine," Mrs. Peterson assured her. "Daniel wanted to bring you some cookies we baked today, and he was curious about that fancy car out front." Charlotte followed their gaze to a sleek black luxury car parked near the entrance. Through the tinted windows, she could just make out a familiar silhouette. "Mommy, look at that car." Daniel's eyes were wide with excitement. "The man in the suit has been sitting there for a while. Mrs. Peterson says it's probably worth more than our whole house." Charlotte's stomach tightened as she recognized Nathaniel Cross's vehicle. What was he doing back here? "Those are very nice cookies, Daniel," she said, trying to redirect his attention. "Thank you for thinking of me." But Daniel's gaze remained fixed on the expensive car. "The man looks important," he observed, "like those businessmen on TV." "Come on, Daniel," Mrs. Peterson said gently. "Your mother needs to get back to work. We can watch that cooking show you like when we get home." Daniel reluctantly stepped back from the window, but his eyes kept darting to the mysterious car. "Bye, Mommy. Be careful walking home tonight." "I will, sweetheart." Charlotte watched them leave, her mind churning with questions about Nathaniel's presence. Through the window, she could see his straight-backed posture, his attention seemingly fixed on the diner's entrance. The evening sun glinted off his car's polished surface, creating a stark contrast with the humble surroundings of their small town. The evening crowd had thinned at May's Diner, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. Charlotte wiped down tables with practiced efficiency, her movements gentle despite her weariness. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Nathaniel Cross stride in, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the worn vinyl booths. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't seen him since that night with the check, and his presence still made her uneasy. He chose a booth by the window, the same one he'd occupied before. "Welcome to May's," Charlotte said, approaching his table with professional courtesy. "What can I get you?" Nathaniel's steel-gray eyes met hers. The meatloaf special was surprisingly good last time. His voice carried that familiar note of authority, though something seemed different about him tonight. Less harsh, perhaps. "Coming right up." Charlotte turned to leave, but he cleared his throat. "And coffee, please." "Black." She nodded and headed for the kitchen, grateful for the moment to collect herself. Through the serving window, she could see him checking his phone. His forehead creased in concentration. The diner's door chimed again. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, entered with Daniel in tow. Charlotte's heart swelled at the sight of her son, even as worry crept in. She wasn't expecting him until her shift ended. "I'm so sorry, Charlotte," Mrs. Peterson called out, her voice wavering. "My arthritis is acting up something fierce tonight. I hope you don't mind." "Of course not," Charlotte assured her, hurrying over. "Thank you for watching him today." She knelt to hug Daniel, who was clutching his favorite dinosaur book. "Everything okay, sweetie?" Daniel nodded, his eyes already wandering around the diner. They landed on Nathaniel, and Charlotte felt a familiar protective instinct rise within her. "Why don't you sit at the counter and do your reading?" she suggested, leading him to a stool. "I'll get you some milk and cookies." But Daniel was transfixed by Nathaniel's presence. The CEO had set his phone aside and was watching their interaction with undisguised interest. Daniel slid off his stool, and before Charlotte could stop him, walked straight to Nathaniel's booth. "Your suit is really nice," Daniel said, his voice clear and curious. "Are you important?" Charlotte rushed over, mortified. "Daniel, honey." But Nathaniel's face had softened in a way she'd never seen before. "That's a matter of opinion," he replied, his usual arrogance absent. What's that book you're carrying? Daniel's face lit up. It's about dinosaurs. Did you know T-Rex had teeth as big as bananas? To Charlotte's surprise, Nathaniel shifted in his booth to make room. I didn't know that. What else can you tell me about T-Rex? Charlotte stood frozen, watching as her son climbed into the booth beside this powerful man who'd tried to test her integrity just days ago. Daniel opened his book, pointing excitedly at the illustrations, while Nathaniel listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. Mom says knowledge is important, Daniel continued, but being kind is more important than being smart. Something flickered across Nathaniel's face, recognition perhaps, or remembrance. Your mom sounds very wise. Charlotte finally found her voice. Daniel, Mr. Cross probably needs to eat his dinner in peace. It's fine, Nathaniel said, and for once, his tone held no trace of condescension. I don't mind the company. As Charlotte returned to the kitchen to check on his order, she kept glancing back at their booth. Daniel was animatedly describing each dinosaur, while Nathaniel asked thoughtful questions that made her son beam with pride. It was disconcerting to see the hard-edged CEO so gentle with her child. When she brought Nathaniel's meatloaf, Daniel was explaining why Stegosaurus was his favorite dinosaur. They're different from the other dinosaurs, but that's what makes them special, he was saying. Different isn't always bad, Nathaniel agreed, catching Charlotte's eye as she set down his plate. There was something searching in his gaze that made her look away. The next hour passed in a blur of serving other customers while keeping an eye on Daniel and Nathaniel's unlikely conversation. Her son had moved on from dinosaurs to describing his upcoming school play, where he would be playing a tree. As the evening wore on, Nathaniel finally stood to leave. He reached for his wallet, but paused to bend down to Daniel's level. Thank you for teaching me about dinosaurs, he said seriously. I learned a lot. Daniel's small hand reached out to touch Nathaniel's tie. Then, in that pure, innocent way that only children have, he leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for Charlotte to hear, Mommy says you're my daddy. The color drained from Charlotte's face. She'd never said any such thing. Daniel must have misunderstood something she'd said, or perhaps simply wished it into being in his young mind. Nathaniel straightened slowly, his expression unreadable as his eyes met Charlotte's across the diner. Nathaniel Cross felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The child's whisper, Mommy says you're my daddy, hung in the air like suspended crystals, fragile and sharp. His carefully constructed mask of indifference cracked for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath. Charlotte's face flushed deep red. She rushed forward, her worn sneakers squeaking against the diner's linoleum floor. Daniel! She placed her hands on her son's shoulders, drawing him back. I'm so sorry, Mr. Cross. He must have misunderstood. I would never... Her voice trembled with embarrassment. Daniel looked between them with wide, confused eyes. His small hand still reached toward Nathaniel's sleeve, fingers curled in the expensive fabric. But Mommy, you said my daddy was a man in a nice suit who helped people. Charlotte's blush deepened. Sweetheart, I meant your real daddy. Your father who's in heaven now. She knelt beside him, smoothing his tousled hair. Remember how we talked about him? He worked at the factory and always wore his Sunday suit to church. Nathaniel straightened his jacket, ice crystallizing around his heart. He'd dealt with hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations, but this small boy's innocent mistake had thrown him completely off balance. He needed to regain control. Children and their imagination, he said coldly, adjusting his titanium cufflinks. The metal felt reassuringly cool against his skin. Though I suppose all men in suits must look the same to them. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. He saw Charlotte flinch, her arms tightening protectively around Daniel. The boy's face fell, and something uncomfortable twisted in Nathaniel's chest. I apologize for my son's confusion, Charlotte said quietly, her dignity returning like a shield. He means no harm. He misses having a father. Daniel buried his face in his mother's shoulder, suddenly shy. I'm sorry, he mumbled. Nathaniel found himself wanting to say something, anything, to erase the hurt in the child's voice, but years of corporate training had taught him to retreat behind politeness when emotions threatened to surface. No harm done. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make. He turned sharply and walked to his booth, pulling out his phone as a barrier. Through the reflection in the window, he watched Charlotte lead Daniel to the back room where a small table was set up for him to do homework. The boy glanced back once, his expression making Nathaniel's carefully constructed walls tremble. The coffee Charlotte brought him grew cold, untouched. The familiar numbers and emails on his phone blurred together. All he could hear was that whisper, that simple trust in a child's voice calling him Daddy. Hours later, in the sterile quiet of his hotel suite, Nathaniel lay on the king-size bed, his jacket and tie discarded. The ceiling above him was smooth and white, offering no answers. City lights filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shadows that seemed to dance with his thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of Daniel's reaching hand, those innocent eyes looking up at him with such hope, or Charlotte's fierce protectiveness, so different from the calculated moves he was used to in his world of corporate chess. "Daddy," the boy had whispered. And for a split second, Nathaniel had felt something crack inside him, something he'd buried long ago under spreadsheets and profit margins. The ceiling offered no relief from his churning thoughts. In the artificial quiet of his expensive room, that simple word echoed louder than any board meeting, any merger announcement, any stock report. A child's whisper had somehow breached walls built over decades of careful isolation. Nathaniel rolled onto his side, his hand clenching in the Egyptian cotton sheets. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would return to New York, to his penthouse office with its view of the city he'd conquered, to his world of power and control where children's whispers couldn't reach him. But as sleep eluded him, that moment in the diner played on repeat in his mind. A small hand on his sleeve, trust in young eyes, and 3 words that had somehow slipped past all his defenses. "Mommy says you're my daddy." He could still feel the ghost of those tiny fingers on his jacket sleeve, could still see the hope drain from the boy's face at his cold response. The memory sat like lead in his stomach, heavier than any business decision he'd ever made. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked its red numbers into the darkness. Another sleepless night in another town, but this time, something was different. This time, the emptiness of his hotel room seemed to echo with a child's innocent mistake and a mother's quiet dignity. Nathaniel stared into the darkness, replaying every detail of that moment in the diner. The worn tiles beneath his feet, the smell of coffee and pie, the soft yellow light that had caught the tears in Daniel's eyes when he'd pulled away. He'd built an empire on his ability to read people, to stay detached, to never let emotions cloud his judgment. But tonight, lying alone in his perfect, empty room, all his carefully constructed walls couldn't silence the echo of one small boy's whisper. The morning sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as Charlotte wiped down tables before the breakfast rush. Her arms ached from yesterday's double shift, but she kept moving, letting the familiar routine comfort her. The bell above the door chimed, and her heart skipped when she saw Nathaniel Cross stride in, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the humble surrounding. "Good morning, Miss Hayes." His voice carried that same arrogant tone she remembered, though something else lingered beneath it, something unsettled. Charlotte straightened her apron. "Mr. Cross, the breakfast menu doesn't start for another 30 minutes. I'm not here for breakfast." He settled into a booth, uninvited, and gestured for her to sit across from him. "We need to talk." She glanced at the clock, then at the kitchen where her manager would soon arrive. "I'm working." "I'll make it worth your manager's time." His steel-gray eyes held hers. 5 minutes. Charlotte hesitated, then slid into the booth, keeping her spine straight. "What do you want?" "To understand." He leaned forward, studying her face. "That check I left you $10,000. It could have changed your life, paid bills, gotten better medical care for your son. And yet you gave it away. Is that why you're here? To question my choices?" "I'm here because you confound me." His fingers drummed against the table's worn surface. "A single mother, working 2 jobs, barely making ends meet. Yet you throw away an opportunity most would grab without hesitation." "I didn't throw anything away," Charlotte said quietly. "I put it where it could help many children, not just one." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Noble. But nobility doesn't pay rent or buy medicine. There are things more important than money, Mr. Cross." Easy words from someone who's never had real wealth. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward her. "Your mortgage is 3 months behind. Your son's medical bills from last winter are still unpaid. I had my assistant run a check. You're one emergency away from losing everything." Charlotte's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. "You had no right to look into my personal affairs." "I have the right to understand why someone would reject help out of pure, stubborn pride. Is that what you think this is? Pride? She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. You really don't understand at all. Then enlighten me. His tone held challenge and frustration in equal measure. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, looking past him to where the first rays of sunlight painted the parking lot in gold. When my husband died, we had nothing but debt and broken dreams. But he left me something more valuable than money. He taught me that our choices define us, that integrity isn't something you can buy or sell. Integrity won't keep a roof over your head, maybe not, but it lets me look my son in the eye and teach him what really matters. She met Nathaniel's gaze directly. Your check wasn't help, Mr. Cross. It was a test, a way to prove your belief that everyone has a price. His expression flickered. And you proved me wrong. No. Charlotte stood up, smoothing her apron. I proved that your money isn't as powerful as you think it is. Nathaniel remained seated, looking up at her with an intensity that made her want to step back. You're an interesting woman, Charlotte Hayes. But your principles might cost you everything. Then I'll lose everything with my soul intact. She picked up her cleaning rag. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. He watched her move to another table, his usual mask of cool control showing cracks of something deeper. The woman's quiet strength both irritated and fascinated him. She should have been easy to dismiss, just another struggling single mother in a small town. Instead, she had become a puzzle he couldn't solve. Nathaniel stood, adjusting his cuffs with precise movements. I'll be extending my stay in town, he announced, though Charlotte didn't turn around. Business matters require my attention. She didn't respond, continuing her work as if he hadn't spoken, but they both knew his words for what they were, a declaration of sorts, a warning perhaps, or a promise. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. You say you can't be bought, Miss Hayes. We'll see about that. The bell chimed as he left, and Charlotte finally allowed herself to lean against the counter, her hands trembling slightly. Through the window, she watched his expensive car pull away, leaving a trail of dust in the morning light. Charlotte sat at their small kitchen table, staring at the crisp receipt she'd found tucked into Daniel's backpack. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. Every item on his school supply list had been purchased: notebooks, pencils, markers, and even the expensive scientific calculator his teacher required. The total made her stomach clench. 157.84. Mommy, look at my new backpack! Daniel bounced around the kitchen, showing off the navy blue bag with reinforced straps. And it has special pockets for everything! Charlotte forced a smile, though worry gnawed at her. It's very nice, sweetheart. But remember what we talked about. We need to return these things. We don't know who bought them. Daniel's face fell. But Mrs. Peterson at the store said someone special wanted to help. Did she say who? Charlotte studied the receipt again, looking for clues. No. Daniel hugged his new backpack closer. She just smiled and said everything was taken care of. Charlotte stood up and paced the small kitchen. The linoleum was worn beneath her feet, another reminder of their tight circumstances. She'd been saving for Daniel's school supplies, putting aside a few dollars from each paycheck. It wasn't much, but it was honest money, earned through her own hard work. Can't we keep them? Daniel's voice was small. Tommy says lots of kids get help with school stuff. Charlotte knelt beside her son, smoothing his unruly hair. It's not that simple, honey. We need to know who gave us such an expensive gift. But why? The innocent question made Charlotte pause. How could she explain pride versus necessity to an 8-year-old? How could she tell him that accepting anonymous gifts made her feel like a charity case? She examined the calculator, exactly the model specified on the supply list. The backpack was practical and sturdy, nothing flashy. Whoever had done this had paid attention to the details. Her mind drifted to Nathaniel Cross, but she pushed the thought away. Why would a CEO bother with something so mundane? Daniel pulled out a pack of colored pencils, his eyes shining. Look, Mommy, they're the good kind that don't break easily. He began arranging them by color on the table. Mrs. Peterson said the person who bought everything knows me from school. Charlotte frowned. That detail didn't fit with her Nathaniel Cross theory. Maybe it was someone from the church? But they usually coordinated such help through the pastor's wife, not through anonymous purchases. She watched Daniel carefully organizing his supplies. His movements were gentle, reverent almost, as if he understood the value of each item. The sight made her throat tight. Her son deserved to start school with proper supplies, just like his classmates. "What about your old backpack?" she asked, trying to be practical. "It still has another year in it." Daniel's shoulders slumped. "The zipper's broken again, and Tommy said he could see my lunch through the hole in the bottom." Charlotte winced. She hadn't realized it had gotten that bad. She'd been so focused on keeping food on the table and the lights on that some things had slipped her notice. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as she wrestled with her decision. The supplies were practical, needed items, not extravagant gifts, and Daniel's joy was impossible to ignore. She picked up the receipt again, noting it was paid in cash. No trace of the buyer. The store, Peterson's General, was owned by a family that had been in town for generations. They were good people who looked out for their neighbors. "Did Mrs. Peterson say anything else?" Charlotte asked, still searching for answers. Daniel shook his head, then brightened. "Oh, she gave me a note, but I forgot." He dug through the backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Charlotte opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat but generic. "Every child deserves a good start. No strings attached." The phrase, "no strings attached," made her think of Nathaniel's check again. But this felt different, more thoughtful, less like a test of character. She watched Daniel laying out his notebooks, each one pristine and ready for learning. His small fingers traced the smooth covers, and she could see him imagining all the things he'd write and draw in them. "Mommy?" Daniel looked up at her with those earnest eyes that could melt her strongest resolves. "Maybe my daddy helped." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Daniel rarely mentioned his father anymore, but she knew he thought about him often. The idea that his father might be watching over them, sending help through others, it was the kind of simple faith that children carried so naturally. She pulled Daniel into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. Her son's warm weight against her chest helped steady her racing thoughts. Perhaps sometimes help wasn't about pride or charity, but about community and grace. "You know what?" Charlotte said softly. "Maybe he did help. Maybe he made sure someone kind knew exactly what you needed." Daniel beamed at her, and she felt some of her resistance crumble. The supplies were already here, already bringing such joy to her son. Sometimes, she realized, the brave thing wasn't refusing help. It was accepting it with grace. She looked at the neat piles of supplies on their kitchen table. Tools for learning, for growing, for building a future. Each item represented possibility, and she couldn't deny her son that. "We can keep them," she said finally, and Daniel's whoop of delight filled their small kitchen. "But we'll find a way to pay it forward when we can, okay?" Daniel nodded solemnly. "Like when I helped Tommy with his math last year?" "Exactly like that." Charlotte smiled, touched by her son's understanding of giving and receiving. "Sometimes we help, and sometimes we're helped. That's how community works." She watched as Daniel carefully packed his new supplies into the backpack, explaining where everything would go and how he'd use each item. His excitement was contagious, and she felt her worry gradually giving way to gratitude. But when Daniel hugged his backpack and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy," Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes. The moment hung between them, sweet and painful, filled with the presence of absence and the mystery of unexpected kindness. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Pine Grove Park's aging playground. Nathaniel Cross stood at the edge of the wood chips, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored gray suit and Italian leather shoe. He loosened his silk tie, watching a group of children chase a red rubber ball across the patchy grass. Daniel's laughter rang out above the others as he darted between his friends, his dark hair bouncing with each step. The CEO found himself drawn closer, his usual commanding stride softening as he approached the makeshift baseball diamond marked by worn cardboard bases. "Hey, mister," a freckled boy called out. "We need one more player. You want in?" Nathaniel's first instinct was to decline. Board meetings and corporate takeovers were his domain, not children's games. But Daniel had spotted him now, his face lighting up with recognition. "Mr. Cross, you can be on my team!" Daniel waved enthusiastically, nearly dropping his oversized mitt. The other children stared at Nathaniel with mixed curiosity and amusement. One girl giggled at his formal attire. Nathaniel felt the unfamiliar sensation of being completely out of his element. "I haven't played baseball since I was your age," he admitted. but found himself rolling up his sleeves anyway. "That's okay," Daniel said, running over to grab his hand. "You can stand here by second base. Just catch the ball if it comes to you." The rubber ball bounced nearby, and Nathaniel scooped it up awkwardly. His expensive watch caught the sunlight as he tossed it back to the pitcher, a small boy with glasses too big for his face. From her bench at the playground's edge, Charlotte watched with widening eyes. She'd brought her mending to work on while Daniel played, but the needle and thread lay forgotten in her lap. The sight of Nathaniel Cross, the intimidating CEO who'd tried to buy her dignity playing baseball with children, was almost impossible to process. "Strike one!" someone yelled as the ball whizzed past the young batter. Nathaniel shifted his weight from foot to foot, trying to remember how to stand ready for a hit. His shoes were getting scuffed, and his pants would definitely need dry cleaning, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to care. The next pitch connected with a solid thwack. The ball soared through the air, heading straight for second base. Without thinking, Nathaniel lunged forward, his hands stretching out. The ball smacked into his palm with a sting that made him wince. "Tag him! Tag him!" Daniel shouted, jumping up and down. Nathaniel spun around to see a girl racing toward his base. He reached out with the ball, barely brushing her shoulder as she passed. "You're out!" The children cheered and groaned in equal measure. Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in Nathaniel's chest. He looked at his reddened palm, then at the celebrating children, and a chuckle escaped him. The sound surprised him deep and genuine. Nothing like his usual calculated laughs at business functions. Daniel beamed at him. "That was awesome, Mr. Cross. You're really good." The game continued, and Nathaniel found himself relaxing into it. He missed catches and made errors, but the children's enthusiasm was infectious. When he managed to hit the ball and run to first base, Daniel's whole team erupted in cheers. "Run faster!" Daniel called out, and Nathaniel found himself sprinting across the grass like he hadn't done since childhood. The laughter came easier now, bubbling up from somewhere long buried. When he slid into home plate, his suit pants collecting grass stains, he threw his head back and laughed openly. The sound carried across the playground, rich and unrestrained. Charlotte watched this transformation from her bench, her fingers clutching her mending. The man before her bore little resemblance to the cold-eyed CEO who'd tried to test her pride with money. This Nathaniel had mussed hair, a crooked tie, and genuine joy written across his features. Her heart performed an uncomfortable flutter. The setting sun painted the playground in golden light as the game wound down. Nathaniel stood with his hands on his knees, catching his breath but still smiling. His usual mask of corporate authority had completely slipped away, replaced by something raw and real. Children began departing with their parents, calling out goodbye to Daniel and Mr. Cross. Nathaniel straightened up, suddenly aware of his disheveled state. He caught Charlotte's eye across the playground, and something electric passed between them. Charlotte quickly looked down at her mending, her cheeks warming, but she couldn't unsee the way he'd laughed, free and unguarded, like a man remembering who he used to be before power and wealth had shaped him into something else. The sound echoed in her mind, mixing with her growing confusion about the man who kept appearing in their lives. Nathaniel Cross sat in his parked Mercedes, staring at Luigi's family restaurant with a mix of uncertainty and disdain. The red and white checkered curtains and hand-painted window signs were a far cry from the Michelin-starred establishments he usually frequented. Still, when Daniel had mentioned it was his favorite place, Nathaniel hadn't hesitated to suggest dinner here. He watched as Charlotte and Daniel approached on foot, the boy skipping ahead while his mother walked with quiet grace. Even in her simple blue dress, Charlotte carried herself with a dignity that many of his wealthy associates lacked. Daniel spotted him first and waved enthusiastically. "Mr. Cross, you came!" Daniel's face lit up with pure joy. Nathaniel stepped out of his car, surprised by the warmth that spread through his chest at the boy's greeting. "I did promise, didn't I?" Charlotte's smile was cautious but genuine. "Thank you for inviting us." Inside, the restaurant buzzed with life. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and the aroma of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air. An elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a bun approached them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Charlotte, honey, and little Daniel." She enveloped them both in a hug. "Your usual booth?" "Hi, Mrs. Luigi," Daniel chirped. "This is Mr. Cross. He's having dinner with us." Mrs. Luigi's eyes twinkled as she assessed Nathaniel. "Any friend of Charlotte's is family here. Come, come." Nathaniel found himself ushered to a corner booth, the vinyl seat squeaking beneath him. A paper placemat with Italian phrases to color sat before him, complete with a small box of crayons. Daniel immediately grabbed his and began coloring enthusiastically. "The chicken parmesan is excellent," Charlotte offered, noticing Nathaniel's bewildered expression as he studied the laminated menu. "I always get spaghetti and meatballs," Daniel announced proudly. "Mom says I'm growing so fast because of Mrs. Luigi's secret recipe." A young waitress arrived with glasses of water and a basket of warm garlic bread. "Hi, Charlotte. Daniel, those meatballs are already in the works for you, buddy." Nathaniel watched in amazement as nearly every passing server or busboy stopped to chat with Charlotte and Daniel. Here was a world he'd forgotten existed, one where people knew each other's names and actually cared about the answer when they asked, "How are you?" "The whole town's like this," Charlotte explained softly, noticing his expression. "When Tom, Daniel's father, passed away, they all helped us through it. Mrs. Luigi sent over dinner every night for 2 weeks. Daniel looked up from his coloring. "Dad used to let me stand on his feet while we danced to the jukebox." He pointed to the vintage machine in the corner, still playing old Italian songs. Nathaniel felt something crack in his carefully maintained facade. When was the last time anyone had shown him such simple kindness? In his world of corporate takeovers and billion-dollar deals, genuine warmth had become as rare as a unicorn. Their food arrived on huge platters, portions that would feed a small army. Mrs. Luigi herself brought extra meatballs for Daniel, pinching his cheek affectionately. "Growing boys need strength." "This is remarkable," Nathaniel admitted, tasting the chicken parmesan. It wasn't haute cuisine, but it was honest, hearty food made with care. "Try the garlic bread," Daniel insisted, pushing the basket toward him. "It's magic bread. Makes you smile every time." Charlotte laughed, the sound that made Nathaniel's heart skip. Daniel believes Mrs. Luigi is secretly a good witch who bakes happiness into her food. Well, he might be onto something, Nathaniel found himself saying, surprising even himself with the playfulness in his voice. As they ate, Daniel regaled them with stories from school, his hands gesturing animatedly. Charlotte gently reminded him not to talk with his mouth full, and Nathaniel found himself relaxing into their easy dynamic. The tension in his shoulders, constant companion of endless board meetings, began to melt away. When Daniel excused himself to visit the restroom, Charlotte's eyes met Nathaniel's. "Thank you for this. He's had such a wonderful time." "I have too," Nathaniel replied, startled by his own honesty. "This place is nothing like what I'm used to. But sometimes simpler is better?" Charlotte suggested. Before he could respond, Daniel returned, sliding into the booth between them. "Can we have spumoni, please, Mom? Mr. Cross hasn't tried Mrs. Luigi's special ice cream." Mrs. Luigi appeared as if summoned, 3 bowls of colorful Italian ice cream in hand. "On the house, for my favorite family and their special guest." As they savored the dessert, Nathaniel noticed how the other diners treated Charlotte and Daniel, not with pity for their circumstances, but with genuine affection. It was so different from the calculating gazes and artificial smiles he encountered in his corporate world. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Luigi insisted on hugging them all, including Nathaniel, who couldn't remember the last time someone had embraced him so warmly. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, Daniel naturally took both their hands in his small ones. "This felt like family," Daniel said simply, swinging their joined hands as they walked toward the parking lot. Nathaniel felt those words echo in his chest. In that empty space he'd tried so hard to fill with success and power. He looked at Charlotte over Daniel's head, saw something soft and uncertain in her eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt truly, completely alive. The warmth of Luigi's family restaurant wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. Red checkered tablecloths covered sturdy wooden tables, and the walls were decorated with vintage Italian posters and family photos. The smell of garlic bread and marinara sauce filled the air. Daniel sat between Charlotte and Nathaniel, happily coloring the children's menu with crayons provided by their friendly waitress. His tongue poked out in concentration as he carefully filled in a cartoon pizza. "More spaghetti, Mr. Cross?" Daniel offered, pushing the shared plate toward Nathaniel. Nathaniel found himself smiling. "Thank you, Daniel. And please, call me Nathaniel." Charlotte watched their interaction, her eyes soft but guarded. The casual dinner had somehow evolved into something more intimate than she'd expected. After their main courses were cleared and Daniel focused on his ice cream sundae, the conversation naturally deepened. "Daniel reminds me so much of Thomas sometimes," Charlotte said quietly, tracing the rim of her water glass. "He has his father's kindness." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, sensing the weight of her words. "You don't talk about him often." "No, I suppose I don't." Charlotte's eyes grew distant. "It's still hard, even after 3 years. Thomas was. He was the gentlest soul you'd ever meet. Worked at the Millbrook factory for 15 years. Never missed a day. He took such pride in his work." Daniel looked up at the mention of his father. Ice cream forgotten. "Daddy made big machines, right, Mommy?" "That's right, sweetheart." Charlotte smoothed his hair. "Your daddy was a master machinist. He could fix anything." Nathaniel noticed how she squared her shoulders, as if bracing herself. "What happened?" he asked softly. "The factory downsized." Charlotte's voice grew tight. "Thomas was among the first wave of layoffs. He tried so hard to find another job, but manufacturing jobs were scarce, and his specific skills, well, they didn't translate easily to other fields." The chandelier above their table cast warm light across Charlotte's face, highlighting the subtle pain in her expression. He took odd jobs, maintenance work, temporary positions. But it wore him down, seeing hour savings dwindle, feeling like he couldn't provide. The stress affected his health. Daniel snuggled closer to his mother, sensing her sadness. Charlotte wrapped an arm around him, drawing strength from his presence. "It started with headaches, then chest pains. The doctors said his blood pressure was dangerously high, but we'd lost our health insurance." She paused, collecting herself. By the time he finally went to the emergency room, it was too late. A massive heart attack. Nathaniel sat very still, his own chest tight with an unfamiliar emotion. The crystal wine glass in front of him suddenly seemed obscenely expensive. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. Charlotte gave a small, brave smile. "We get by. I'm grateful for my jobs, for this community. The diner owner lets me bring Daniel in sometimes when I can't find childcare. The hospital has a program for families who can't afford care. We're not alone. Mommy makes the best pancakes at the diner," Daniel added proudly. "And she reads me stories every night, even when she's super tired." Charlotte blushed. "Daniel, it's true though." The boy turned to Nathaniel earnestly. "She works really hard. Sometimes she falls asleep in the chair when she's reading, but that's okay. I put her blanket on her, like she does for me." Nathaniel felt something crack in his carefully constructed worldview. He thought of the countless corporate decisions he'd made, the cold calculations of profit margins and efficiency reports. How many families like Charlotte's had been affected? How many Thomas Hayes had there been? The factory, he found himself asking, his throat dry. Was it Millbrook Manufacturing on the east side? Charlotte nodded. "It's mostly empty now. They kept a skeleton crew for basic operations, but most of the work was outsourced overseas." She shrugged slightly. "That's business, I suppose. We're not the only family that had to adjust." The matter-of-fact acceptance in her voice made it worse, somehow. Nathaniel's hands clenched under the table as memories surfaced: board meetings, signatures on documents, celebrations over successful cost-cutting measures. 3 years ago, right when his company had acquired and restructured several mid-sized manufacturing operations in the region, including Millbrook Manufacturing, the ice cream in his bowl had melted completely, forming a sweet puddle that reflected the overhead lights. Nathaniel stared at it, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, creating golden patches on the worn linoleum floor. Charlotte wiped down the counter with practiced movements, her mind still dwelling on last night's dinner at Luigi's. The breakfast rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. Nathaniel walked in, looking less intimidating than usual in a light blue dress shirt without a suit jacket. His presence still commanded attention, but there was something different about him lately, a softness around the edges that hadn't been there before. "Good morning, Charlotte," he said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Coffee, please." She poured him a cup, noting how he'd stopped ordering his usual complicated specialty drinks. "You're here early today. I wanted to catch you before your shift got busy." He took a careful sip. "I have something to ask you." The bell above the door chimed, and Daniel burst in, his backpack bouncing. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor who walked him to school, followed more slowly. "Mom! Nathaniel!" Daniel's face lit up as he spotted them both. He ran to the counter, nearly colliding with a chair. "Careful, buddy," Nathaniel said, steadying the chair with one hand. Charlotte noticed how naturally he'd started using terms of endearment with Daniel. "Thanks for bringing him by, Mrs. Peterson." Charlotte called out. Would you like your usual tea? The older woman nodded and sat at her regular table. Daniel climbed onto the stool next to Nathaniel, his feet swinging. Can I have hot chocolate? Daniel asked hopefully. Charlotte glanced at the clock. You have school in 20 minutes, sweetie. Please? Daniel turned to Nathaniel. Will you tell Mom it's okay? Nathaniel chuckled but raised his hands in surrender. That's your mom's decision, bud. I'm not getting in the middle of that one. Charlotte felt a warm flutter in her chest at his response. He could have easily undermined her authority, but instead, he'd supported it. Tell you what, Charlotte compromised. You can have chocolate milk instead. While Daniel happily accepted his drink, Nathaniel cleared his throat. Actually, this works out well. I wanted to ask both of you something. He pulled an elegant cream-colored envelope from his briefcase. My company holds an annual charity gala in the city. It's this Saturday evening. Charlotte tensed slightly. She could feel where this was heading. I'd like you both to come as my guests, Nathaniel continued, his usual confidence wavering slightly. It's a family-friendly event. There will be other children there. Daniel's eyes grew wide. A party? In the city? He turned to Charlotte. Can we go, Mom? Please? Charlotte busied herself wiping an already clean spot on the counter. I don't know, Daniel. That's very kind of you, Nathaniel. But there's a children's area with games and entertainment, Nathaniel pressed gently. And the proceeds go to children's hospitals across the state, including the one here in town. Charlotte looked up sharply at that. She wondered if he knew about her donation of his check to that very hospital. Will there be fancy food? Daniel asked excitedly. Nathaniel smiled. The fanciest. And chocolate fountains. Mom! Daniel practically bounced in his seat. Chocolate fountains. Charlotte felt cornered in the kindest possible way. It's very formal, isn't it? Yes, Nathaniel admitted. But please don't worry about that. I'd like to. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'd like to show you both another part of my world, and maybe prove that it's not all cold and corporate. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the same man who had arrogantly offered her money that first night. This was someone trying to build bridges. Please, Mom? Daniel's eyes were pleading. I've never been to a fancy party. Charlotte looked between her son's hopeful face and Nathaniel's carefully neutral expression. She could see how much it meant to both of them. What time would it start? She asked slowly. 7 o'clock. I'd send a car for you both around 6. Nathaniel hesitated. I know you have the evening shift on Saturdays. I've already spoken to Ted about covering it. Charlotte stiffened. You talked to my manager? I asked if it would be possible. Nathaniel corrected quickly. He said you haven't taken a Saturday off in over a year. He was happy to arrange it. She should have been annoyed at his presumption, but she could see he was trying to remove obstacles rather than strong armor. Mom? Daniel's voice was soft now. Can we please go? Charlotte took a deep breath. All right, she said finally. We'll come. Daniel let out a whoop of joy, causing several customers to smile. Even Mrs. Peterson looked up from her tea with approval. Thank you, Nathaniel said quietly. His relief was evident. I'll have the invitation sent to your house with all the details. As Daniel chattered excitedly about what he might see at the party, Charlotte felt a knot form in her stomach. She looked down at her waitress uniform and thought about her simple wardrobe at home. What could she possibly wear to a high society charity gala? Nathaniel seemed to read her mind. Charlotte, he said softly, while Daniel was distracted by his chocolate milk. Please don't worry about anything. Just come as you are. But that was exactly what worried her. Coming as she was, a small-town waitress and single mom, into Nathaniel's world of wealth and influence. She managed to smile anyway, not wanting to dampen Daniel's excitement. Time for school, sweetie, she said, helping Daniel off the stool. Say goodbye to Nathaniel. Bye. Thank you for inviting us. Daniel gave Nathaniel a quick hug before running to Mrs. Peterson. As they watched Daniel leave, Charlotte turned to Nathaniel. I appreciate the invitation, but I don't have anything suitable for an event like that. You'll be perfect in anything, Nathaniel said, then seemed embarrassed by his own directness. I mean, don't feel pressured. It's about the charity, not the clothes. But as Charlotte returned to her work, she couldn't help worrying about what to wear. Her best dress was a simple sundress from the department store, hardly appropriate for a charity gala. She watched Nathaniel leave, his confident stride and perfectly tailored clothes a reminder of the vast difference between their worlds. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled like a crystal palace. Ornate chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city skyline twinkling against the night sky. Charlotte paused at the entrance, her borrowed emerald green gown rustling softly. The dress, loaned by her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, fit perfectly, though Charlotte had spent hours carefully steaming out the wrinkles and adjusting the vintage beadwork. Daniel squeezed her hand, looking dapper in his rented little tuxedo. "Wow, Mommy, it's like a castle." Charlotte smiled down at him, grateful for his innocent excitement that helped calm her nerves. She'd pinned her dark hair in a simple updo, with a few loose curls framing her face. The minimal jewelry she wore, just her mother's pearl earrings, felt appropriate rather than lacking. Across the room, Nathaniel stood talking with a group of executives. He wore an impeccably tailored black tuxedo that made him look even more handsome than usual. When he glanced toward the entrance, his conversation stopped mid-sentence. Charlotte felt her cheeks warm as his gaze found her. The intensity in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. He excused himself from his group and made his way across the ballroom, never looking away from her. "You came," he said softly when he reached them. His eyes traveled from her face to the elegant drape of her gown and back again. "Charlotte, you look like a princess," Daniel supplied helpfully, making both adults laugh. "Yes," Nathaniel agreed, his voice warm. "Exactly like that." He offered his arm to Charlotte. "May I escort you both to your table? I made sure you're seated near the chocolate fountain. I had a feeling Daniel might appreciate that." Daniel's eyes went wide. "There's a chocolate fountain?" "Indeed there is." Nathaniel winked at the boy. "But dinner first, young man." As they walked through the crowd, Charlotte noticed the curious glances from other guests. She felt out of place among all the designer gowns and expensive jewelry, but Nathaniel's steady presence beside her helped her stand taller. Their table was beautifully set with fine china and crystal glasses. Daniel clambered into his chair, amazed by the multiple forks and spoons at his place setting. "Which one do I use first?" he whispered to his mother. "Start from the outside and work your way in," Nathaniel answered before Charlotte could, pulling out her chair for her. "That's what my grandmother taught me when I was about your age." Charlotte looked at him in surprise. Sometimes she forgot that he hadn't always been a wealthy CEO. The evening progressed like a dream. The food was exquisite, though Daniel declared the rolls were not as good as Mommy's. Charlotte watched with a warm heart as Nathaniel patiently explained each course to her son, treating Daniel's questions with the same respect he showed his business associates. After dinner, the orchestra began playing soft music. Couples moved onto the dance floor, their movements elegant and practiced. Charlotte was content to watch, but Nathaniel had other ideas. He stood and extended his hand to her. "Would you do me the honor?" Charlotte hesitated. "I don't know these dances. Just follow my lead," he said gently. "Trust me." Daniel gave her an encouraging nod. "Go dance, Mommy. I'll watch the chocolate fountain to make sure it doesn't run away." Nathaniel chuckled, and Charlotte placed her hand in his. He led her to the dance floor, placing one hand at her waist while holding her other hand carefully in his. The orchestra played a slow waltz, the melody sweet and romantic. "Relax," Nathaniel murmured, guiding her into the first steps. "You're doing perfectly." Charlotte gradually let herself be swept into the rhythm. The ballroom lights sparkled above them, and the soft music wrapped around them like silk. She could feel the warmth of Nathaniel's hand through the fabric of her dress, smell his subtle cologne, see the tender look in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said quietly, just for her ears. "Having you and Daniel here, it makes everything better." "Better than what?" she asked. "Better than it's been for a very long time." His thumb traced a small circle on her waist, perhaps unconsciously. "This world, my world, it can be very cold, empty, but you both bring such warmth to it." Charlotte's heart fluttered at his words, at the genuine emotion in his voice. The man holding her now seemed worlds away from the arrogant CEO who tried to test her pride with money. This Nathaniel was real, vulnerable, human. They moved together in perfect harmony, as if they'd danced together 100 times before. The other couples on the floor seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in their own bubble of soft light and sweet music. From their table, Daniel watched them with a bright smile, occasionally sneaking glances at the chocolate fountain. But even at his young age, He could see something special happening between his mother and Nathaniel. The way they looked at each other reminded him of the fairy tales his mother read to him at bedtime. The orchestra's song continued, and Charlotte found herself drawing slightly closer to Nathaniel. His hand tightened gently at her waist in response. The connection between them felt electric yet comfortable, exciting yet safe. In his arms, she wasn't a struggling single mother or a waitress in a borrowed dress. She was simply Charlotte, and that seemed to be exactly what he wanted. As they turned slowly on the dance floor, the city lights twinkled through the windows like stars. The crystal chandeliers cast their light over them, making Charlotte's emerald dress shimmer. Nathaniel's eyes never left her face, as if he were trying to memorize every detail of this moment. Neither spoke again as they danced, letting the music and their movements say what words couldn't yet express. The emotions between them simmered like a sweet, slow-burning flame, full of promise and possibility. When the song drew to a close, they remained standing close together for a moment longer, reluctant to break the spell that had woven around them. The orchestra began another piece, but Nathaniel made no move to step away, and Charlotte found she didn't want him to. Nathaniel's eyes widened when he spotted them. Excusing himself from a cluster of executives, he made his way across the ballroom floor. His confident stride faltered for just a moment as he took in Charlotte's transformation. The emerald dress highlighted her natural grace, making her stand out among the designer gowns and expensive jewelry that filled the room. "You look." Nathaniel cleared his throat. "You both look wonderful." Daniel beamed up at him, straightening his little bow tie. "Thank you. Mrs. Peterson helped Mommy with her hair." "Do I look like a real gentleman?" "The most distinguished gentleman here," Nathaniel said, kneeling to adjust Daniel's tie with gentle hands. The tender gesture made Charlotte's heart skip a beat. An elderly couple approached them, the woman cooing at Daniel. "What a handsome young man. Are you enjoying the party, sweetheart?" "Yes." Daniel bounced on his toes. "This is my mommy!" He grabbed Charlotte's hand, then reached for Nathaniel's. "And this is my daddy! We're all dressed up tonight!" Charlotte felt her cheeks flush, ready to correct him, but Nathaniel's response surprised her. He simply smiled, squeezing Daniel's small hand. "We're having a special family evening out," he said smoothly, standing to shake the couple's hands. "I'm Nathaniel Cross." The woman's eyes sparkled. "Oh, Mr. Cross, what a lovely family you have. Your son is absolutely precious." Throughout the next hour, similar scenes played out as they moved through the crowd. Daniel proudly introduced them as his parents to anyone who would listen, and each time, Nathaniel accepted the role with growing ease. He kept close to them, his hand occasionally brushing Charlotte's back as he guided them through the crowd, making sure they were comfortable. At the buffet table, Daniel tugged on Nathaniel's sleeve. "Daddy, can I try the chocolate fountain?" "Of course, buddy." Nathaniel grabbed a plate and helped Daniel select strawberries to dip. "Here, let me show you how to do it without making a mess." Charlotte watched them, her throat tight with emotion. Nathaniel was so patient, showing Daniel how to hold the fruit securely on the little fork, both of them laughing when a drop of chocolate landed on Daniel's chin. It was everything she'd wished for Daniel, a father figure who treated him with such natural affection. "Would you like to dance?" Nathaniel asked her softly after they'd finished their dessert. Daniel was happily occupied at a children's activity table nearby, decorating cookies with other kids. Charlotte hesitated, but the warmth in his eyes drew her in. "Yes, I think I would." He led her to the dance floor as a slow waltz began. His hand was warm against her waist, and he held her other hand gently, maintaining a respectful distance while still drawing her into his orbit. "Thank you," she murmured as they swayed to the music, "for being so kind to Daniel tonight. You didn't have to play along." Nathaniel's expression grew serious. "I wasn't playing along, Charlotte. Your son. He has a way of making me see things differently, making me want to be better." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tighten. This wasn't the same arrogant man who tried to buy her pride that night at the diner. As they danced, she noticed the small changes, how his sharp edges had softened, how genuine warmth had replaced his cold smirk. "You're different with him," she observed. "He reminds me of who I used to be. Before." Nathaniel trailed off, then smiled sadly. "Before I forgot what really matters." The music shifted to another song, but they kept dancing, drawn into their own quiet world. Charlotte found herself relaxing into his embrace, allowing herself to imagine, just for a moment, that this could be real, that they could be the family Daniel so innocently believed them to be. Later, as Charlotte went to check on Daniel, She paused near a group of executives gathered around a high-top table. They were drinking champagne and laughing, unaware of her presence. "Remember that factory closure in Ohio?" one man said, swirling his drink. "Cross was brilliant there. Ruthless, but brilliant." Another executive nodded. "Saved millions in operating costs. Of course, the whole town practically collapsed afterward, but that's business. That's why he's the best," a third chimed in. "Never let sentiment cloud his judgment. I heard some of those workers lost everything. Houses, pensions, the works. But Cross? He got a bonus that could buy a small island." The crystal glasses clinked as they toasted, but Charlotte barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. Ohio, her husband's factory. The closure that had sent him into a spiral of depression, that had stressed his heart until she pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself. The same hands that had so gently helped her son with chocolate-covered strawberries had signed the papers that destroyed her husband's life. The same man who danced with her so tenderly had celebrated while families like hers crumbled. The emerald dress suddenly felt too tight, the ballroom too bright. Across the room, she saw Nathaniel looking for her, his face soft with an emotion she couldn't bear to name. Daniel's innocent voice echoed in her head, "My daddy," and her heart shattered all over again. The glittering chandeliers cast dancing shadows across Charlotte's face as she stood frozen near the refreshment table. Her hands trembled as she overheard snippets of conversation from the group of executives nearby. "Remember that factory shutdown in Miller's Creek?" A heavyset man in an expensive tuxedo chuckled. "Cross showed real steel there. Didn't even blink when he cut 300 jobs. Brilliant move," another added, swirling his champagne. "Stock jumped 15 points that quarter." Charlotte's world tilted sideways. Miller's Creek. That was where Tom, her late husband, had worked for 12 years before the sudden closure. The factory shutdown that had sent him into a spiral of depression, leading to the accident that took his life, and Nathaniel Cross had been behind it all. She watched him now, across the room, showing Daniel how to properly fold a napkin into a swan. His gentle smile, the careful way he guided her son's small hands, it all seemed like a cruel joke. The same hands that had destroyed countless families like hers were now pretending to build something meaningful with her child. Daniel's laughter echoed across the ballroom, and the sound that usually warmed her heart now felt like ice in her veins. She set down her untouched champagne glass with trembling fingers and walked toward them, each step heavy with purpose. "Daniel, sweetheart," she called out, her voice tight. "Could you please go ask Mrs. Peterson to watch you for a moment? Mommy needs to talk to Mr. Cross." Daniel looked up, his bow tie slightly crooked. "But we're not done with the swan." "Now, please," Charlotte insisted, managing to keep her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Nathaniel straightened up, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Charlotte, is everything all right?" She waited until Daniel was safely out of earshot before facing him. "Miller's Creek Factory," she said quietly, watching his face. "Ring any bells?" The color drained from Nathaniel's face. His carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment, and in that instant, Charlotte saw the truth. "You knew," she whispered. "All this time, you knew exactly who I was, didn't you? The widow of Tom Hayes. Just another casualty of your corporate success." "Charlotte, let me explain." Nathaniel reached for her arm, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me." Her voice shook with barely contained fury. 300 families, Mr. Cross. 300 lives you destroyed with one signature. My husband worked there for 12 years. 12 years of loyalty, gone in an instant because some numbers on your spreadsheet didn't add up. Around them, the gala continued in full swing. Music played, glasses clinked, and laughter floated through the air. All of it now feeling like a mockery to Charlotte. "The economic situation at the time," Nathaniel began, his corporate mask slipping back into place. "Don't you dare," Charlotte cut him off. "Don't you dare hide behind business jargon. My husband lost everything. His pride, his purpose, his will to live. And you," she looked at him with fresh eyes, seeing past the expensive suit and practiced charm. "You've been playing some kind of game, haven't you? The generous benefactor, the surrogate father figure. Was it amusing to watch us struggle? Did it make you feel powerful to throw crumbs of kindness our way? Nathaniel's face paled further. That's not what this was about. Charlotte, please. I watched him break, she continued, her voice rising slightly. I watched the strongest man I knew crumble piece by piece. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The night of the accident. She swallowed hard. He was driving to a job interview 2 towns over. A last-ditch effort to save us from losing everything. He never made it home. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air between them. Nearby guests began to notice the tension, throwing curious glances their way. I never meant... Nathaniel started, reaching for her again. What did you mean then? Charlotte demanded, stepping back. Was this some sort of twisted redemption project? Poor little widow and her fatherless son. The perfect opportunity to prove you have a heart after all? You're not being fair, Nathaniel said, his own voice tightening. What happened at Miller's Creek was years ago. I'm not that person anymore. No? Charlotte laughed bitterly. Then who are you? Because the Nathaniel Cross I've heard about tonight sounds exactly like the man who offered me money to test my pride. The only difference is now you're trying to buy my trust instead of my dignity. She glanced across the room at Daniel, who was happily showing Mrs. Peterson his napkin swan. Her heart ached at how easily her son had opened his heart to this man. My son, she said, her voice breaking slightly, called you Daddy tonight. And you smiled. You smiled knowing you were partly responsible for his real father's death. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Nathaniel staggered slightly, gripping the edge of a nearby table. Charlotte, he pleaded, what I feel for you and Daniel is real. Whatever mistakes I've made. Mistakes? She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. A mistake is forgetting to file paperwork or missing a meeting. What you did was cruel, calculated, and cold. And the worst part? You're still doing it, playing with people's lives like they're pieces on a chessboard. She turned away, unable to look at him anymore. Daniel, she called out, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. It's time to go home, sweetheart. Daniel ran over, his face falling as he sensed the tension. But we just got here, and Mr. Cross was going to show me. Now, Daniel, Charlotte said firmly, taking his small hand in hers. Charlotte, please, Nathaniel said, his voice rough with emotion. Let me make this right. She turned back one last time, meeting his eyes. There are some things money can't fix, Mr. Cross. Some bridges that can't be rebuilt. Stay away from my son. Stay away from us both. With that, she led Daniel toward the exit, her borrowed gown sweeping across the marble floor. Behind her, she could feel Nathaniel's presence, frozen and silent, as the weight of the past finally caught up with him in the midst of all his glittering success. Daniel looked back over his shoulder, confusion and disappointment written across his young face. But Charlotte kept walking. Each step took her further from the man she'd begun to trust, the future she'd dared to imagine, and the fool's gold of redemption she'd almost believed in. The city lights twinkled like cold stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathaniel's penthouse. He sat in his Italian leather chair, a glass of untouched scotch on the side table beside him. The space around him felt vast and empty, much like the hollow feeling growing in his chest. Charlotte's words from the gala echoed in his mind. You're exactly who I thought you were at first. Cruel, calculating, and cold. His fingers clenched the armrest. For the first time in years, he couldn't dismiss someone's judgment with his usual arrogant indifference. The look in her eyes when she'd discovered the truth about Miller's Creek had stripped away all his carefully constructed defenses. Nathaniel rose and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city hummed with life. Thousands of lives he'd affected with the stroke of a pen, never once considering the human cost of his decisions. He'd called it business necessity and market dynamics, clean, sterile terms that masked the reality of destroyed livelihoods and broken families. Like Charlotte's family. Like Daniel's father. The thought of Daniel sent a sharp pain through his chest. The boy's innocent trust, his eager smile whenever Nathaniel entered the room, the way he'd proudly introduced him as Daddy at the gala. It all felt like a mockery now. He'd played at being a father figure while carrying the guilt of contributing to the real father's death. What kind of man am I? He whispered to his reflection in the glass. The question hung heavy in the air. For the first time, he truly looked at himself. Not the polished CEO image he presented to the world, but the man beneath. The boy from a middle-class family who'd clawed his way to the top, hardening his heart with each rung he climbed on the corporate ladder. His vision blurred. Something wet rolled down his cheek, startling him. Nathaniel Cross, the man known for his iron control, was crying. The realization broke something inside him. He stumbled back to his chair and buried his face in his hands as silent sobs shook his shoulders. He cried for the man he'd become, for the humanity he'd sacrificed in pursuit of success. He cried for Charlotte's late husband and the hundreds of others whose lives he'd disrupted without a second thought. He cried for Daniel, who deserved better than a man who'd hurt his family trying to play father. The tears felt foreign, yet cleansing. Each sob stripped away another layer of the armor he'd built around his heart over the years. The penthouse's silence seemed to amplify his breakdown, making him face every painful realization without distraction. Memories flooded his mind. His own father, worn down by years of factory work but still finding joy in simple family moments. His mother's disappointment when he'd missed her last birthday to close a deal. The way he'd dismissed his younger sister's pleas to help with their parents' medical bills, telling her to be practical about end-of-life care. When had he become this person? When had balance sheets become more important than human dignity? Through the window, the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Nathaniel's tears had dried, leaving him drained but oddly clear-headed. He stood up, legs slightly unsteady, and walked to his home office. On the wall hung the magazine covers celebrating his business victories. Ruthless Rising Star, the Ice King of Wall Street, Cross, the Man Who Never Loses. The titles that once filled him with pride now made him sick to his stomach. He reached up and took down the frames one by one, placing them face down on his desk. Each removal felt like shedding a piece of his old self. The sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Nathaniel stood at the window again, but this time his reflection showed him something different. Not just who he was, but who he didn't want to be anymore. "I can't change the past," he whispered to himself, "but I can be different going forward." The words felt like a vow. Not a grand gesture to win back Charlotte's approval, he knew he didn't deserve that, but a genuine recognition that he needed to change. The man who could casually destroy lives for profit wasn't someone he could bear to be anymore. His gaze swept over his luxurious penthouse, seeing it with new eyes. All this wealth, all this power, what good was it if it only served to isolate him from his humanity? The trappings of success suddenly felt like chains rather than trophies. Nathaniel walked to his desk and sat down, pulling out a legal pad. With a steady hand, he began to write, not a business plan this time, but a list of changes he needed to make. Starting with Miller's Creek. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Cross Enterprises' main conference room. Camera flashes popped like lightning as reporters packed the space, their notepads and recorders ready. The air crackled with anticipation. Nathaniel Cross stood at the podium, looking different than his usual polished self. His tie was slightly askew, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. But there was something else, too. A quiet determination that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite his obvious fatigue. "I've called this press conference to announce significant changes at Cross Enterprises, effective immediately." He paused, glancing down at his notes, then pushed them aside. "But first, I owe an apology. 10 years ago, this company made decisions that devastated communities like Miller's Creek. We called it strategic downsizing. We called it market optimization. But let's call it what it really was, putting profits over people." The reporter's pen scratched frantically across paper. In the front row, his board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Today, I'm announcing a comprehensive reform package." Nathaniel's voice grew stronger. "First, we're reopening the Miller's Creek factory. All former employees will be offered their positions back, with full benefits and back pay for the time of closure." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A young reporter's hand shot up. "Mr. Cross, this will cost the company millions. How do you justify this to your shareholders?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened.
"Some costs can't be measured in dollars."
"The true cost of our past decisions was paid in broken families, lost homes, and shattered dreams. That's a debt that's long overdue." He clicked to the next slide, showing detailed charts. "We're establishing a $50 million community development fund. This will support education, healthcare, and small business initiatives in all communities affected by our past closures. Additionally, We're implementing new corporate policies that prioritize worker protection and community impact in all future business decisions. The board members were now openly fidgeting. One started to stand, but Nathaniel's sharp glance kept him seated. "Mr. Cross," called another reporter, "these changes represent a complete reversal of your previous business philosophy." "Why now?" Nathaniel gripped the edges of the podium. For a moment, he thought of Charlotte's face at the gala, the hurt and betrayal in her eyes. He thought of Daniel's innocent trust, and of all the other children who'd lost their security because of his choices. "Because I was wrong," he said simply. "I spent years building wealth while destroying what really matters. Community, dignity, faith in each other. That ends today." He straightened his shoulders. "I'm also announcing my own salary reduction. Effective immediately, my compensation will be cut by 90%, with the difference going directly to worker benefits and wage increases." The room erupted. Cameras flashed frantically. His PR director looked ready to faint. "One final announcement," Nathaniel continued, raising his voice above the chaos. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Daily Operations to focus exclusively on implementing these reforms. My primary office will relocate to Millers Creek until the factory reopening is complete." Questions flew from all directions. Nathaniel held up his hand. "I'll take 3 more questions. Then my team will distribute detailed documentation of all changes." A veteran reporter stood. "Sir, your critics might say this is just a PR stunt. How do you respond?" "They're right to be skeptical," Nathaniel acknowledged. "Words are cheap. That's why every promise I've made today is legally binding. The documents are already signed. These changes cannot be reversed, even if I'm voted out tomorrow." In a modest living room across town, Charlotte sat on her worn couch, watching the press conference on her small TV. Daniel played with his trucks on the floor, occasionally glancing up at the screen. She hugged a throw pillow to her chest, her expression a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. When Nathaniel mentioned Millers Creek, her breath caught. She remembered the day the factory closed, how her late husband had come home with empty eyes and a pink slip. "Is that your friend from the party?" Daniel asked, looking up at Nathaniel's image on the screen. Charlotte smoothed her son's hair. "Yes, honey. He looks sad," Daniel observed. "He looks." Charlotte paused, studying Nathaniel's face. The arrogance she'd first met was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "He looks different." On screen, Nathaniel was answering the final question. "Yes, these changes will affect our stock price. Yes, some shareholders will be angry, but leadership isn't about making easy choices. It's about making right ones. I lost sight of that once. I won't make that mistake again." Charlotte reached for her phone, then stopped herself. Part of her wanted to believe in this transformation, but the wound was still too fresh. She watched as Nathaniel left the podium, his usual confident stride replaced by the weighted steps of a man carrying a heavy but necessary burden. The news cut to financial analysts debating the announcement's impact. Charlotte muted the TV, her mind spinning. The man she'd seen today wasn't the arrogant CEO who tried to buy her pride at the diner, nor was he the charming figure from the gala. This was someone else, someone who seemed to be fighting his own battles with the same quiet determination she'd learned in her struggles. "Mom?" Daniel's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" Charlotte smiled, grateful for her son's simple question amidst her complicated feelings. "Sure, sweetie. Want to help me make them?" As they headed to the kitchen, she cast one last glance at the TV. The ticker tape showed Cross Enterprises stock plummeting, but Nathaniel's words echoed in her mind. Some costs can't be measured in dollars. She wasn't ready to forgive yet, but something had shifted. For the first time since the gala, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe people really could change. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut lumber through Miller Creek's community park. Early morning sunlight filtered through yellowing leaves, casting dappled shadows on the half-dismantled playground. A small group of volunteers had gathered, armed with tools and determination to rebuild what time had worn down. Among them stood Nathaniel Cross, looking completely out of his element in work boots and faded jeans. His usually immaculate hands gripped a hammer, his expensive watch replaced by a simple fitness tracker. Sweat dampened his plain gray t-shirt as he worked alongside the other volunteers, many of whom didn't recognize the CEO in such ordinary clothes. "Mr. Cross," little Tommy Jenkins called out, waving from atop the old slide platform. "Can you help me measure these boards?" Nathaniel smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his typically calculated expression. "Coming up, buddy." He tucked the hammer into his tool belt and climbed the wooden structure, careful to test each step. The platform creaked under his weight. "See, we need new boards here and here," Tommy pointed, his small finger tracing the weathered wood. "Dad says it's not safe anymore." "Your dad's right," Nathaniel agreed, pulling out a measuring tape. "Want to learn how to measure like a real carpenter?" Tommy's eyes lit up. "Yeah." As Nathaniel showed Tommy how to mark the measurements, more children gathered around, curious about the tall stranger who spoke to them like equals. Soon, he had an impromptu construction crew of elementary schoolers, all eager to help. "Mr. Cross." Sarah Miller, a pig-tailed 7-year-old, tugged at his shirt.
Can I ride on your shoulders to reach the high part?
Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, then chuckled. "All right, but be careful up there." He bent down, letting Sarah climb onto his shoulders. Her small hands gripped his hair for balance as he stood carefully.
"I can see my house from here,"
Sarah squealed with delight. More children gathered around, jumping and calling out, "Me next! Me next!" For the next hour, Nathaniel alternated between actual construction work and giving shoulder rides to excited kids. Their laughter echoed across the park, pure and uninhibited. Some of the adult volunteers exchanged knowing looks. This wasn't the cold corporate titan they'd seen on TV. "Time for a water break," Mrs. Peterson, one of the organizers, called out. The children scattered toward the coolers, leaving Nathaniel to catch his breath. He wiped his brow with his sleeve, sawdust falling from his disheveled hair. His expensive haircut was long forgotten, replaced by the honest mess of manual labor. Picking up his hammer again, he moved to the swing set area, where several support posts needed reinforcing. The morning wore on, and Nathaniel lost himself in the rhythm of work. There were no board meetings here, no shareholders to appease, no corporate strategies to consider, just wood, nails, and the satisfaction of building something real with his hands. "The trick is to angle the support beam just so," Mr. Jenkins explained, showing Nathaniel how to properly brace the swing set frame. "That way it'll last longer, handle more weight." Nathaniel nodded, absorbing the practical wisdom. His manicured hands were now covered in splinters and calluses, but he didn't seem to mind. He'd forgotten about his phone, which lay silent in his truck, ignored for the first time in years. The children returned periodically, making him their unofficial jungle gym. He found himself lifting them onto beams, spotting them as they tested the new monkey bars, and answering endless questions about everything from his favorite color to why the sky is blue. "You're pretty strong for an old guy," 10-year-old Bobby commented, as Nathaniel helped him down from a high beam. Nathaniel laughed, a deep, genuine sound that surprised even him. "Thanks. I think—" The playground was slowly taking shape. Fresh wood replaced rotting boards, new safety features were added, and bright colors began to appear as volunteers started painting the finished sections. Nathaniel moved from task to task, taking direction from more experienced volunteers without a hint of his usual need for control. A group of kids had claimed him as their personal climbing frame, and he played along, pretending to be a moving jungle gym while still managing to hammer nails one-handed. Their joy was infectious, their trust humbling. These children didn't care about his net worth or his company's stock price. They just saw someone willing to play with them, to help rebuild their special place. "Okay, mountain climbers," he called out to the 3 kids currently hanging off his arms and back. "The mountain needs to finish this section before lunch." "But you're our favorite mountain," little Sarah protested, still perched on his shoulders. "The mountain promises to return for more climbing adventures after lunch," he bargained, carefully setting each child back on solid ground. As he turned back to his work, sawdust coating his clothes and happiness lighting his face, he caught sight of a familiar figure at the park's entrance. Charlotte stood there, frozen in mid-step, her eyes wide with surprise. The scene before her was so far removed from the arrogant CEO who'd first walked into her diner. Nathaniel Cross, covered in sawdust and wood shavings, surrounded by laughing children, working with his hands to rebuild a community playground. No cameras, no press, no corporate agenda, just a man trying to make something better than it was before. The evening sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows, painting streaks of orange and gold across the worn linoleum floor. Charlotte moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her footsteps echoing the familiar rhythm of another busy dinner service. The bell above the door chimed softly, but she didn't look up immediately, focused on refilling Mrs. Henderson's coffee cup. When she finally turned, she froze. Nathaniel Cross stood just inside the entrance, looking different than she'd ever seen him. His usual power suit was replaced by work clothes covered in sawdust, and his hands showed signs of manual labor, reddened and slightly swollen. A smudge of dirt marked his cheek, and his perfectly styled hair was tousled by the wind. "Charlotte," he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. He didn't move further into the diner, respecting her space. She set the coffee pot down with deliberate care. "Mr. Cross." Her voice was steady, professional, but her fingers trembled slightly against the counter. "I'm not here to make excuses," he began, taking one careful step forward. "I was wrong. Not just about the factory, but about so many things. I've lived most of my life thinking success meant winning at any cost." Charlotte watched him, her expression guarded. The other customers pretended not to listen, but the usual dinner chatter had hushed noticeably. "I saw the playground today," she said finally, her voice soft but clear. "You were there all morning." Nathaniel nodded, unconsciously rubbing his palms together. It felt good to build something instead of just signing checks. To see actual results of work that helps people. He paused, swallowing hard. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just needed you to know that meeting you and Daniel, it changed something in me. You showed me what real strength looks like." Charlotte's coworker Sally appeared at her elbow. "I can cover your tables," she whispered, giving Charlotte's arm a gentle squeeze. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte untied her apron. "Let me get my coat." Outside, the autumn air had grown crisp. Streetlights flickered on one by one, creating pools of warm light along Main Street. They walked in silence for several moments, their footsteps falling into an uncertain rhythm. "Daniel asks about you," Charlotte said finally, her words visible in the cooling air. "He saw you on TV at the press conference." Nathaniel's shoulders tensed. I hope he's doing well." "He is." Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. Without a word, Nathaniel shrugged off his jacket and offered it to her. She hesitated before accepting it, the fabric still warm from his body. "The changes you announced at your company," she began carefully, "they'll affect a lot of families." "It's not enough," he admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "But it's a start. The board wasn't happy, but I told them either we make these changes or I step down and take my shares elsewhere." They passed the newly constructed playground equipment, its fresh wood gleaming in the streetlights. Charlotte paused, looking at the half-finished structures. "You were really out here working?" she asked, though the evidence was clear on his hands and clothes. "From 7 this morning." He nodded. "Turns out, I'm not very good with a hammer. The foreman had to show me 3 times how to properly secure a support beam." A small, self-deprecating smile crossed his face. "But I learned." Charlotte studied him in the dim light, noting the humility that had replaced his usual arrogance. "Why are you really here, Nathaniel?" He met her gaze directly. "Because I needed to apologize. Not through a press release or a charitable donation, but face to face. What my company did to your husband's factory, what I did, it was wrong. I can't undo that damage, but I can acknowledge it, and I can try to be better." They resumed walking, the silence between them less tense than before. As they approached Charlotte's modest house, warm light spilled from the windows where Daniel's babysitter was watching him. "Would you like to come in?" Charlotte asked, then quickly added, "Just for a few minutes. Daniel's probably still awake." Nathaniel shook his head gently. "Not tonight. This isn't about what I want anymore." He took a step back, hands in his pockets. "Thank you for listening, Charlotte. That's more than I deserved." Charlotte stood on her front path, still wearing his jacket. "Will you be at the playground tomorrow?" 7 a.m., he nodded. "The foreman says we might finish the main structure by weekend's end." She turned toward her door, then paused. Maybe Daniel and I will stop by. He loves watching construction projects." "I'd like that," Nathaniel said softly. "But only if you're both comfortable with it." Charlotte nodded slightly, her hand on the doorknob. "Good night, Nathaniel." "Good night, Charlotte." She watched as he walked away, his figure gradually disappearing into the evening shadows. His jacket still hung from her shoulders, smelling of sawdust and something indefinably familiar. For the first time since the gala, she felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen, just a little. Inside, She could hear Daniel's excited voice asking the babysitter to read just one more story. Charlotte touched the rough fabric of Nathaniel's jacket, thinking about the man who had arrived in their town in an expensive suit and left his pride in the sawdust of a community playground. She wasn't ready to trust him fully. Not yet. But perhaps, she thought, there was room for a careful step forward. The night had settled into a peaceful quiet when Daniel's first cough echoed through their small apartment. Charlotte, who had been folding laundry in the living room, didn't think much of it at first, but within minutes, the coughing turned harsh and persistent. "Mommy?" Daniel's voice was weak and frightened. Charlotte rushed to his bedroom, her heart skipping when she saw him sitting up in bed, his face flushed and sweating. She pressed her palm to his forehead and gasped at the burning heat beneath her touch. "Baby, you're burning up." She grabbed the thermometer from the bathroom, her hands shaking as she waited for the reading. When it beeped, the display showed 104, 2° F. Her stomach dropped. "My chest hurts," Daniel whimpered, clutching at his pajama top. Charlotte didn't waste another second. She wrapped him in his favorite dinosaur blanket, grabbed her purse, and carried him down to her old station wagon. The engine sputtered to life as she silently prayed it wouldn't fail her tonight. The streets were nearly empty as she sped toward Memorial Hospital, constantly checking her rearview mirror to see Daniel's reflection. His breathing had become labored, each intake accompanied by a concerning wheeze. "Stay with me, sweetheart," she murmured, running a red light after checking for cars. "We're almost there." The emergency room's fluorescent lights felt harsh after the dark drive. Charlotte burst through the doors, Daniel limp in her arms. "Please, my son, he can't breathe properly and his fever's so high." The nurses sprang into action, taking Daniel from her arms and wheeling him away on a gurney. Charlotte followed, her legs trembling as she answered their rapid-fire questions about his symptoms and medical history. They settled Daniel in a pediatric room, hooking him up to monitors that beeped steadily. The doctor suspected pneumonia and ordered chest x-rays. Charlotte held Daniel's small hand as they waited, trying to keep her own fear from showing on her face. She didn't remember calling Nathaniel, but somehow he knew. The door opened, and there he stood, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, his tie loose around his neck. The look of genuine concern in his eyes made her throat tight. "I came as soon as I heard," he said quietly, moving to Daniel's other side. "How is he?" "They think it's pneumonia," Charlotte whispered, her voice cracking. "They're running tests." Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Mr. Cross?" he mumbled. Nathaniel leaned closer, smoothing Daniel's damp hair back from his forehead. "Hey, buddy. You're going to be just fine." The night stretched on endlessly. Nurses came and went, adjusting IVs and checking vitals. The x-rays confirmed pneumonia in Daniel's left lung, and they started him on strong antibiotics. Through it all, Nathaniel remained, making quiet phone calls to reschedule meetings and sending his assistant for coffee and sandwiches that Charlotte barely touched. Around midnight, Daniel's fever finally broke. His breathing eased, and the desperate edge of fear in Charlotte's chest began to soften. Still, she couldn't take her eyes off the rise and fall of his chest, as if looking away might somehow stop its rhythm. "You should rest," Nathaniel said softly, pulling a chair closer to Daniel's bed. "I'll watch him." Charlotte shook her head. "I can't, Charlotte." His voice was gentle but firm. "You're exhausted. Just close your eyes for a moment. I promise I won't leave." She wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, but the events of the night were catching up with her. The adrenaline that had carried her through was fading, leaving her drained and shaky. Without meaning to, she found herself leaning slightly toward Nathaniel. He didn't move away. Instead, his shoulder pressed warm and solid against hers, offering silent support. Daniel's monitors beeped steadily in the quiet room, a reassuring rhythm that seemed to say everything was going to be okay. Charlotte felt her eyelids growing heavy. The steady sound of Daniel's breathing mixed with the warm presence beside her created a cocoon of safety she hadn't felt in years. Her head tilted, coming to rest against Nathaniel's shoulder. He remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might break this fragile moment of trust. Daniel slept peacefully in the hospital bed, his color much improved, his breathing easy and regular at last. Charlotte knew she should move, should maintain the careful distance she'd built between them, but in this moment, with her son safe and Nathaniel's quiet strength beside her, she allowed herself to simply be. Her eyes drifted closed, the weight of her fear and exhaustion finally finding release as she leaned against him in the quiet hospital room. Snow fell softly outside the small brick church, coating the window ledges in white powder. Inside, warm golden light from paper lanterns cast a gentle glow across wooden pews filled with proud parents and excited children. The annual Christmas pageant was about to begin. Charlotte sat in the third row, smoothing her navy blue dress nervously. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the wreath pin on her collar, a small gift Daniel had made for her in Sunday school. The empty seat beside her felt particularly noticeable until a familiar figure slipped quietly into the pew. Nathaniel wore a simple gray sweater instead of his usual business attire. His presence brought both comfort and butterflies to Charlotte's stomach. They exchanged small smiles, a delicate understanding passing between them after everything they'd been through. "Thank you for coming," Charlotte whispered, her voice barely audible above the piano's opening notes. "I wouldn't miss it," Nathaniel replied softly. "Daniel's been practicing his lines for weeks." The lights dimmed, and Mrs. Peterson, the elderly Sunday school teacher, stepped forward to introduce the play. Charlotte's heart swelled as she spotted Daniel peeking out from behind the makeshift stable, dressed in his shepherd's costume. The cloth robe was a bit too long, dragging slightly on the floor, and his plastic crook kept slipping from his small hands. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he stepped forward with determination. His voice rang out clear and strong. "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy." He had mixed up his lines, accidentally saying the angel's part instead of the shepherd's, but his proud smile never wavered. Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes. Beside her, Nathaniel reached over and squeezed her hand gently. She didn't pull away. The pageant continued with its endearing mix of forgotten lines, occasional stumbles, and pure childhood wonder. Mary nearly dropped baby Jesus, thankfully just a doll, and one of the wise men got his crown tangled in the star hanging from the ceiling. But through it all, Daniel beamed with joy, occasionally catching his mother's eye and waving enthusiastically. During the final carol, all the children gathered at the front of the church. Their voices joined together in Silent Night, some off-key but all heartfelt. Daniel's face glowed in the candlelight as he sang, his eyes drifting between his mother and Nathaniel. Charlotte felt Nathaniel shift beside her, and she glanced over to see him discreetly wiping his eyes. The powerful CEO who once tried to test her pride with money was now moved to tears by a children's Christmas pageant. The transformation wasn't lost on her. As the final notes faded away, the congregation burst into applause. Parents rushed forward with cameras and hugs, creating a cheerful chaos of celebration. Daniel broke away from the group, running down the aisle toward them with his shepherd's robe flapping behind him. He launched himself into Charlotte's arms first, then turned to beam at Nathaniel. His small finger pointed straight at the man who had become such an important part of their lives. "That's my daddy," he announced proudly to Mrs. Peterson, who had followed him down the aisle. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She waited for Nathaniel's reaction, remembering how such declarations had once made him uncomfortable. But instead of stiffening or correcting Daniel, Nathaniel knelt down to the boy's level. His eyes were soft with emotion as he whispered words that made Charlotte's heart skip. "I'd like to be, if your mommy lets me." The moment hung suspended in the warm church air, filled with possibility and hope. Daniel's innocent joy, Nathaniel's vulnerable honesty, and Charlotte's surprised wonder created a tableau of perfect stillness amidst the bustling celebration around them. Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly and moved away, leaving the three of them in their own private world. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the background, and somewhere in the distance, the choir began to sing, "O Holy Night." The scene was complete. Not an ending, but a beautiful moment of beginning. The church doors opened, releasing a stream of chattering families into the snowy evening. Daniel bounded down the steps, still wearing his shepherd's costume, his small face glowing with pride after his performance. Tiny snowflakes caught in his dark curls as he spun around to face Charlotte and Nathaniel. "Did you see me? Did you hear my lines?" Daniel bounced on his toes, clutching his wooden shepherd's staff. "I didn't forget any of them." "You were perfect, sweetheart." Charlotte wrapped her arm around his shoulders, her heart full. "The best shepherd in the whole pageant." "Indeed," Nathaniel agreed, his voice warm. "Very professional." He reached down to adjust Daniel's costume robe, making sure it would keep him warm for their walk home. The three of them set off down the sidewalk, their footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. Christmas lights twinkled from the houses they passed, and the street lamps cast golden pools of light on the white ground. Daniel skipped ahead, using his staff to draw patterns in the snow. "Hot chocolate when we get home?" Charlotte suggested, watching her son's delight. "I think we have some marshmallows left." "With whipped cream, too?" Daniel called back hopefully. Nathaniel chuckled. "I might have picked some up at the store yesterday." He caught Charlotte's questioning look and shrugged, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "I was in the neighborhood." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Charlotte noticed how different Nathaniel looked from the arrogant CEO who had first walked into her diner. His face was softer now, his smile genuine. When Daniel ran back to grab both their hands, Nathaniel's grip was gentle and sure. "Can we sing carols?" Daniel asked, swinging their joined hands. "Like they did in the pageant?" Silent night soon filled the quiet street, Daniel's sweet voice carrying the melody, while Charlotte and Nathaniel harmonized softly. Other families walking home smiled as they passed, some joining in for a verse or two. The simple joy of the moment wrapped around them like a warm blanket. At Charlotte's small house, they stamped the snow from their boots on the welcome mat. Daniel rushed to the kitchen, eager for his promised hot chocolate. Charlotte followed, pulling mugs from the cabinet, while Nathaniel helped Daniel out of his costume. "Careful, it's hot," Charlotte warned, passing out steaming mugs topped with whipped cream and marshmallows. They settled in the living room, where a modest Christmas tree twinkled in the corner. Daniel had decorated it himself, with handmade ornaments and paper chains. "I have an idea," Daniel announced, licking whipped cream from his upper lip. "We should build a snowman tomorrow. A whole snow family." "That sounds wonderful," Charlotte said, cupping her warm mug. "If the snow stays, I could come by after lunch," Nathaniel offered hesitantly. "If that's all right," Charlotte met his eyes over her mug. "We'd like that." Daniel launched into elaborate plans for their snow family, describing how they needed carrots for noses and his old scarf for the daddy snowman. His excitement was contagious, and soon they were all laughing at his increasingly creative ideas. "And we can have hot chocolate again after?" Daniel asked hopefully. "You and hot chocolate," Charlotte teased, ruffling his hair. "What am I going to do with you?" "Love me forever and ever," Daniel replied with a cheeky grin. Nathaniel watched them with soft eyes, his expression thoughtful. When Daniel yawned widely, Charlotte glanced at the clock and realized how late it had gotten. "Time for bed, young shepherd," she said gently. "You need your rest if you're going to build a snow family tomorrow." Daniel pouted but didn't argue. He hugged Nathaniel tightly, whispering something that made the man's eyes grow suspiciously bright. Then he scampered off to brush his teeth, his shepherd's staff forgotten by the couch. At the front door, snowflakes still drifted past the porch light. Nathaniel helped Daniel into his winter coat, kneeling to adjust the little boy's scarf with careful attention. His hands moved with practiced tenderness now, so different from his once precise corporate efficiency. "Is it tight enough?" he asked Daniel, who nodded solemnly. "Perfect," Daniel declared. "Just like a daddy would do it." Nathaniel's eyes lifted to meet Charlotte's, and in that moment, the depth of his devotion was clear in his gaze. No words were needed. The love and commitment shining there spoke volumes. Charlotte felt her heart flutter, knowing that somehow, against all odds, they had found their way to this precious moment. The snow continued to fall softly outside, wrapping their small world in quiet beauty. As they stood together in the warm light of home, the aroma of pancakes and coffee roused Charlotte from a peaceful sleep. For a moment, she lay still in her bed, listening to the unfamiliar but heartwarming sounds drifting up from her small kitchen. The gentle clatter of pans, Daniel's high-pitched giggle, Nathaniel's deep, patient voice giving instructions. "Careful now. Hold the bowl steady while you stir." A pause, followed by more laughter. "That's it, buddy. You're a natural chef." Charlotte's eyes grew misty as she slipped on her worn cotton robe. How long had it been since morning sounds had filled their little house with such joy? The floorboards creaked softly under her feet as she made her way downstairs, pausing at the kitchen doorway to take in the scene before her. Daniel stood on a kitchen chair, wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas, intensely focused on stirring a large mixing bowl. A smudge of flour decorated his cheek. Beside him, Nathaniel had rolled up the sleeves of his crisp dress shirt he must have gone home to change before returning early this morning. His tie was nowhere in sight, and his usually perfect hair was slightly mussed. "Mommy," Daniel spotted her first. We're making breakfast, and I didn't spill anything, well, only a little bit." Nathaniel turned, and the warmth in his eyes made Charlotte's heart skip.
"Good morning," he said softly.
"We hope we didn't wake you." The smell was too good to resist. Charlotte stepped into the kitchen, taking in the cheerful mess. Flour dusted the counter, and eggshells sat in a neat pile waiting to be discarded. A stack of golden pancakes already towered on a plate near the stove. "You two have been busy. Nathaniel showed me how to flip them." Daniel demonstrated with an empty pan, his face serious with concentration. "And we put chocolate chips in some of them." He said it was okay, because it's a special morning. "Is it?" Charlotte raised an eyebrow at Nathaniel, who suddenly looked slightly nervous. "Well, I thought." He cleared his throat. "After last night's pageant, maybe we could start a new tradition. Sunday morning breakfast. All of us together." The simple hope in his voice touched something deep in Charlotte's heart. This wasn't the polished CEO making grand gestures anymore. This was just a man, standing in her modest kitchen with pancake batter on his hand, trying to build something real. "I'd like that," she said quietly. Daniel beamed, oblivious to the weight of the moment. "Can we eat now? I'm starving." "Set the table first, champion," Nathaniel reminded him, helping him down from the chair. Daniel rushed to gather plates, his bare feet pattering on the linoleum floor. Charlotte moved to help, but Nathaniel caught her hand gently. "Let us do this," he murmured. "You deserve to be taken care of sometimes, too." She watched as Nathaniel guided Daniel through the proper placement of forks and napkins, answering the boy's endless stream of questions with infinite patience. The morning sun streamed through her small kitchen window, catching the silver threads in Nathaniel's dark hair and making Daniel's eyes sparkle with happiness. Soon they were settled around her old oak table, steam rising from plates piled with pancakes and cups of fresh coffee, hot chocolate for Daniel. The boy had insisted on sitting between them, his presence bridging any lingering uncertainty. "These are even better than diner pancakes," Daniel declared, chocolate smeared at the corner of his mouth. "No offense, Mommy." Charlotte laughed, really laughed, for what felt like the first time in years.
"None taken, sweetheart."
"Your mother's cooking is exceptional," Nathaniel said, catching her eye with a smile. "I've never had better pie than hers." "That's 'cause she makes it with love," Daniel said matter-of-factly, reaching for another pancake. "That's what she always says is the secret ingredient." Something about his innocent statement made the air in the room shift, become charged with unspoken emotion. Charlotte looked around her small kitchen at the dishes they'd need to wash, at Daniel's school artwork taped to the refrigerator, at Nathaniel's expensive watch lying forgotten by the sink while he helped her son cut his pancakes. This was what healing looked like, she realized. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but quiet Sunday mornings and chocolate chip pancakes. The way Daniel's laughter echoed off the walls, free and unguarded. The gentle way Nathaniel folded his power and privilege away to sit at their humble table, his eyes full of gratitude just to be there. "Tell the story about the first pancake you flipped," Daniel urged Nathaniel. "The one that stuck to the ceiling." Nathaniel groaned dramatically, making Daniel giggle.
"I was hoping to maintain some dignity here."
"Too late," Charlotte teased, surprising herself with how natural it felt. As Nathaniel launched into his tale of culinary disaster, complete with gestures that had Daniel nearly falling off his chair with laughter, Charlotte felt the last pieces of her guarded heart shifting into place. The morning light filled their little kitchen with gold, warming the scene like a blessing. Their laughter, Daniel's bright and clear, Nathaniel's rich and deep, her own joining in without hesitation, rose to fill every corner of the house. It wasn't just sound. It was healing. It was hope. It was home. In that moment, Charlotte knew with absolute certainty that they weren't three separate stories anymore, but one family, bound together by something stronger than circumstance or choice. Here, in this ordinary moment made extraordinary by love, they were whole. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Charlotte Hayes, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.